Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship and Big Ben. Our tradition is to introduce ourselves before we hear from our speaker. And just by a show of hands, is there anyone joining us for the first time or after a long absence? Welcome. Hopefully we'll try and remember your name so we can make you feel welcome afterwards at the social period. So let's go around. My name is Tom.
My name is Brad.
Henry.
Scott.
Benjamin.
My name is Michael.
My name is Gary.
I'm Carl.
I'm Rolf. I'm Robert.
My name is Peter.
My name is Cass.
My name is Michael.
I'm Jerry.
I'm Mark.
My name is Mark.
Jay. I'm Richard Azzolini.
Jeff.
I'm Wally.
James.
My name is Roy. My name is Gage.
I'm Bob.
Oswaldo.
My name is David.
Michael.
My name is Darcy.
Dennis.
Peter.
I'm Jack. I am Gerhard.
My name is John.
My name is Douglas.
My name is Patrick.
Gerald.
Ralph.
Great. Did we miss anyone? Okay, well, it is my pleasure to introduce today one of our own, Jerry Martin. Jerry has been attending the Gay Buddhist Fellowship since 2008. He was an emergency room doctor for over 20 years and now works in an urgent care setting. In between, he graduated from Pacifica Graduate Institute with a master's in counseling and an emphasis on depth psychology. His thesis looked at resilience among the generations of men who came out together following Stonewall. As a marriage and family therapist, he has done individual counseling and led groups for HIV-positive men, bereavement, and cancer support. Having had a life full of challenges and misadventures, he will speak of his own resilience and how he views this as a part of his Buddhist path. Jerry, welcome.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm aware that it is April Fool's Day. I don't know whether Tom told you, but I had my little security blanket in here, which is my outline and some quotes, and I left it at home. So I'm going to be winging it today. So why did I choose to talk about resilience? I think it's because my life has had a lot of challenges in it. And I feel like I've come through that with, in some ways, stronger, healthier, and with a degree of equanimity. And I'm very grateful for that. And so how was that process? How did that happen? I think first I should maybe define what resilience is. And resilience is the ability to go through significant trauma, suffering, pain, loss, grief, chaos, or disruption in your life and come out of it physically or physiologically or psychologically intact and perhaps stronger from your experience. For a Buddhist, the process, it's not about the definition, but it's the process. And I think the process of resilience is all within the Four Noble Truths, and in particularly in the Eightfold Path, which is a path to resilience. So, I think that there's a school of psychology that believes that there is within all of us an inborn drive towards health and survival. and that is both conscious and unconscious. And I believe that is an underpinning of all spirituality, actually. And I know that has come, that power, whatever that is, has come forth for me at a time when I felt that I was confronted with pain and evil in a way that I saw no redemption, but redemption came. So, I'd like to quote, unfortunately, my papers were in my thesis, and I have a quote here that I would like to read to you. It's by Paula Young Eisendreth, who was a Jungian psychologist, who wrote The Resilient Spirit, Transforming Suffering into Meaning and Purpose. And she used Buddhist perspectives in this. She views insight, compassion. Well, first of all, she said that there are many. Well, I actually can't remember the exact quote, but anyway, she views insight, compassion, and renewals as the gifts of suffering and pain, and explains why adversity sometimes leads to transformation and sometimes to more suffering. Suffering is seen as one of the engines of human development and can give rise to hidden resources of compassion and creativity. It is only when adversity has knocked our defenses down that we pose the big questions. Who am I? What is my purpose here? It is in times of need that we break habitual barriers between others and ourselves and experience intimate connections, often for the first time. And I think that is pretty much the essence of a Buddhist perspective on how resilience happens. So, what have been my challenges? My challenges have been childhood ADHD, which I still have and was very evident this morning. A little bit of dyslexia. War, murder, being caught up in 2 conflicts in Africa where I thought my life was in peril. Later on, it was the AIDS crisis and dealing with my own illness and the death and loss of friends. And following that, it was cancer. And those have all been significant challenges for me. And I somehow feel like resilience is a process where once you sort of get the hang of it, you start doing better, and it becomes more natural. And it's not making light of it. I think it's a learned process. So I'm going to start off by talking about how I feel like the seeds of resilience started in my childhood, as is the case for many people. So let's talk about my family. I think I was very lucky in the family I had. We were middle class. Money was never plentiful, but there was always love and support. And it was always a very safe environment. And that was very important. My mother was kind and very wise, and I think I owe a lot of my resilience to her mentoring. She set high standards, but was always there to support you in meeting them. My father was funny and inspired humor in his children, and generous almost to a fault. And it was always a very caring environment. I first became aware myself that my ADHD was something of a problem when, after a summer rain in Denver, a mud puddle formed between all of our houses, and all the kids gravitated down to the mud puddle to make a mess, and I was there with everybody else. And one of the problems with ADHD is that the kids have poor impulse control, and that sometimes leads to interaction problems with other children. And on that particular day, this other child became infuriated with me and picked up a Folgers coffee can full of mud and pounded it on my head so only my mouth was sticking out, and I was otherwise totally engulfed in Folgers coffee can mud. And so I couldn't see and I couldn't hear, and I sort of lumbered my way up in the direction I thought where my mother was, screaming and yelling. And I think I was probably around 5 or 6. And she heard me, and she came and she rescued me, and she took off the coffee can and wiped the mud off and wiped my tears. And she said, "Well, why was he so mad at you?" And the interesting thing was, I had absolutely no idea. And that's not atypical of kids with ADHD in their impulse problems. Then the next thing that was significant that happened, it was just a few months later, my aunt and uncle brought my grandmother, who nobody liked, she was sort of a mean woman, out to visit us from Kansas. And so we all went to the Royal Gorge in Colorado, which I don't know if you know where it is, but it's a deep gorge, maybe 1,000, 1,200 feet deep. And when we got there, my brother peeled off with my aunt and uncle, who I think were very happy to get away from my grandmother. So that left me and my mother with my grandmother. And like any self-respecting kid with hyperactivity problems, I split as fast as I could. And I ran, and I came to this rope suspension bridge crossing over the gorge. And I saw it, and I gave out a whoop of joy, and I started running across, and I tripped, and I fell partway through it, so I was suspended upside down. So my head and most of my torso, my right arm, were all hanging out, and I was hanging on by my left hand and my legs. And I was 5 years old, and so that was, I was there for several minutes, and I tried to extract myself, and I only fell further. And finally, after several minutes, my mother found me, and I remember her voice very strangled sounding, very tense. And she said, "Jerry, how did you get yourself in this mess?" And I don't think that was the first time she ever said that. And I couldn't respond, and I don't think I said a word for 2 days. The next thing that happened was we lived at that time in Denver on a busy street, and across the street where there was this huge field that was just nirvana to a kid like me. It had snakes, it had lizards, it had black widow spiders, all sorts of wonderful things. And to me, my special thing was there was a garter snake that would chase me, and then I'd turn around and chase it, and we had this game going somehow. And even though I had strict orders not to ever cross that road and go there, I just couldn't resist. And my mother caught me coming back across the road, dodging cars. And I think she was just beside herself. When I got there, she pulled me over, pulled down my pants, took a switch off of a bush, and spanked my butt hard. And it stung and it hurt, and I was crying and I was furious. But I could hear my mother weeping as she was doing that, saying, "I don't know how else to get your attention. I don't know how else to get your attention." And that got through to me in a way that nothing else had. And that started to shift within me. And looking back at it, I realized my mother was terrified. She was terrified that I was going to get killed. My judgment was so bad. So then she started her campaign to sort of make me more mindful and more able to cope in the world. And one of the ways she did that was whenever I had interactions with other kids, she would quiz me over and over again. Well, what were you thinking? What was he thinking? If the positions were reversed, how would you feel? So she was really developing in me the skill to see how I was interacting with other people, what that was like. Then as I got older and I started school, and there was no definition of ADHD in those days, but she was just winging it. And she figured out that I was a very remarkably curious child. I was a little psycho, actually, just running around, but always curious about things. And so she decided to channel my energy into making school fun and interesting and fascinating. And she would take whatever I was studying in school and she would amplify on it and get me so fascinated in it that I was just entranced. And one of the things, again, about ADHD is that the kids can focus if they're interested. And I ended up being a really excellent student and did very well. So that was how, I guess, the seeds of healing happened for me, or for coping happened for me with my ADHD. And when I had trouble with something academically, she would make me go try it again and again and again. As I found success, I was always rewarded. After a while, I learned to reward myself. So I was learning coping skills that were very valuable to me. So fast forward through in school, I was sort of one other thing. So in that way, I was successful as a child. The area where I wasn't quite so successful was in dealing with my sense of emerging gay identity. It started off joyfully enough. My father took me to the YMCA, and at that time, the YMCA was the YMCA. And on the way out, we went through the swimming area. And at that time, all the men were naked. And I was transfixed. He could not pull me. He could not get me out of there. I was just overjoyed at seeing all these naked men. I had never seen that before. And finally, he grabbed me by my belt and pulled me out. And for weeks after that, I had wonderful dreams of naked men in puppy piles. I didn't know what they were doing, and that was actually a source of speculation. But that was how I first became aware of my attraction to men. And but then it took a darker turn, and 2 or 3 years later, when I, with a couple of the neighbor boys, we were sort of goofing around and playing, and it became somewhat sexual. And we were caught. And we were forbidden to see each other again, to play with each other again. We were thoroughly shamed. And for once, my mother really wasn't much help. And I was always aware that in some areas my mother was very sensitive and couldn't go certain places. And after her death, I found out that she had been sexually abused by a relative as a child. And that was one place that she couldn't go. So I was pretty much on my own dealing with this. And I felt that there was something really wrong with me. I sensed that my father was embarrassed originally with the swimming pool situation, and then this happened, and it was summertime, and I was isolated. My friends and we couldn't play with each other, so I get on my bicycle every day and bicycle maybe half a mile to this creek where I would just hang out, and I would observe the metamorphosis of tadpoles into frogs, and I would look at salamanders, and I'd look at all sorts of things. But I also found myself being, I think, very introspective for a child. I would ponder what my situation was, what sort of life I was going to have, how I was going to be, and I worried about myself and started coming up with a plan to somehow get by in the world. This was all made a little bit more difficult by the fact that someone I knew was kidnapped by a pedophile. And that was a big secret. Nobody knew that. And I didn't really understand it, except that I, being a kid with poor boundaries, snuck into the house and heard the mother talking to the doctor about what had happened, which was oral sex. And of course that was something that had been very sort of one of the things I thought about. And so that just gave me one more layer of concern and anxiety. Was I going to be a pedophile? And as I got older, I knew that pedophiles killed people and did things. And so I had all this confusion about who I was sexually and what was going to happen to me and what did I want to happen to me and what did I not want to happen to me. And there were no role models, there were no mentors. It was something I had to sort out for myself. With time, of course, I realized that was not who I was. And eventually, but I stayed firmly in my self-imposed closet until I was one of those generations of people who left that closet and came out into the world after Stonewall, finally finding integration, a fully integrated life where they felt that they could be proud of themselves. Another thing happened in my childhood that was significant, and that was that in third grade I sat next to a girl named Cecily Coors, who I thought was sort of a mean girl. I didn't like her very much. I think it was because she made fun of my table manners. But I didn't like her. And the year after we moved to California, her father was kidnapped for ransom and murdered. And I remember processing this with my mother and not knowing what to think of it, not knowing what to think of the fact that I hadn't liked her, and then started thinking what it was like to be her, my mother's lessons again. What would it be like to be her, to go through this? And I think for the first time in my life, I felt compassion for someone I didn't like. And I could put myself in her position and recognize how devastated her life was. And I could feel genuinely sorry for her and could share her grief with her. I was 7 or 8 years old at that time. So now fast forward. I was sort of a nerd in school, and but I always had friends, and I didn't really come out of my shell until I was a senior in high school, and I was in sort of an advanced group, and everybody was sort of crazy, and I was crazy too, and we had a great time. And that whole process continued into college. I loved college. It was opening up doors. It was a wonderful time in my life. And by that time, I had learned how to function in a way that things would work. I would go into the stacks of the library and just sit there and just grind away at my homework, knowing that I had the reward afterwards of playing with my friends, doing things that I wanted to do, having a social life. And it also didn't hurt that I actually really enjoyed most of the things I was studying. As a matter of fact, I really loved that part of it. I was interested in anthropology, but because there was the Vietnam War rearing its ugly head, I was pre-med. My father thought I could be a good doctor, and it seemed like an honorable profession, and it was a draft deferral. So I thought, well, that's what I'll stick with that. And ultimately, I did get into 2 medical schools, and I have to say, medical school was the most crushing disappointment of my life. It was, for somebody with my learning style, the first year or 2 was agonizing. It was just rote memory, dry, not very interesting. And but I stuck with it. And by the time clinical studies came around, things were better. Better but harder, in a sense. Harder in the sense that I had never in my life really encountered people who were dying, who were suffering, who were in misery. And that was compounded by my anxiety about knowing that I was going to be responsible, doing my part to make them well. And that was very daunting. Fortunately, medical school knows that that's what students are going through, and everything was set up in such a way that you sort of started off learning simple tasks, and once you did that, you went to something harder, and then something harder and harder, and there was always someone to mentor you. So you learn to face your fears and become more confident and more self-assured. And that's really a part of what resilience is, I believe, is being able to face your fears and do something that you're worried about, and to grow from that experience and to be successful. So I think the next thing that happened in terms of my academically was during my internship, I was really worried about doing my rotation through the emergency room, because I knew it was going to be at night, and for 6 hours during the night I was going to be the only person there. I could call residents down, I could call other interns down, but it was all going to be on me, and I was really terrified. Until I got there, and I discovered it was an absolutely perfect fit for somebody with ADHD. As a matter of fact, I've taken some courses on ADHD, and they say one of the careers that's well attuned to somebody with my learning style is being an emergency room doctor, because I was dealing not with one project or one thing where I had to just stick with that, but rather I had multiple things to work at, and I could juggle them all at the same time. And that was my strength. That has always been my strength. So I really felt like I'd come into my own in that regard. Following that, of course, life had its way of intruding, and I was drafted, of course, into the war. I was a flight surgeon, and I have to say that there was nothing. War was an existential experience of numbness that I only broke out of in a battlefield situation that was so chaotic and so pathetic and so full of pathos that I came to understand and feel my own pain, which was a blessing. Following that, I settled into my life, which was being as a doctor. I knew that I needed some balance in my life, so I had a home that was sort of a setting of tranquility, that was a counterbalance to my professional life, and I had friends. I had a couple of lovers. One was chaotic, the other one was quite wonderful. And life was looking good. I was very optimistic, and then the AIDS epidemic happened. And in a 2-week period, I found out that somebody I had been dating had been keeping a secret from me, which was that he thought he was positive. And I had a huge blood exposure from someone at work. And so I then dealt for, I guess, 2 or 3 years wondering what my situation was going to be, what my life was going to be, would I ever date again, would I survive, would I live, all those things. And having that confirmed, of course, was not what I wanted, but I was prepared as much as you can be. And I realized that I was really fortunate, because I saw myself first and foremost as a healer. And I knew that I had a gift, not only professionally, but also I could take my healing skills to make other people's lives better, if not my own necessarily. And I also could help my friends, and I nursed several friends through their final illnesses. And actually, I think that is in itself very healing, knowing that you're doing something worthwhile in your life, even though your life may be reaching a conclusion. And I came close to dying. And then just when I was really at the brink, probably just weeks away from death, the protease inhibitors came out. And I immediately rebounded. I mean, amazingly so. And it took me a long while took me a year to fully realize that I was going to live. And I had just really sort of come to that conclusion and started to think ahead. What did I want to do? I realized I didn't want to do emergency medicine anymore. I didn't know that I had the resilience for it physically or immunologically. But I knew I wanted to do something in the healing arts. And so that's why I decided to go to become a therapist. But that was all put on hold when I found out that I had cancer. And that was like a slap across my face. And my friend Mari said, well, what you need to do is you need to have a pity party. You need to invite all your friends and all your grief and all your anxiety and just put it on the table and just wallow in grief. So I wallowed for around a day and a half, and I thought, shit, this is really boring. And that was the end of the pity party. And one of the things that happened... Do I have enough time?
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes.
One of the things that happened in my treatment is that I underwent 6 months of testosterone suppression. I had no testosterone. And whether it was part of my process or not, but I started seeing life in a different way, which I think was very intriguing to me and probably could be intriguing to many of you. I started seeing life in a more gentle way. And guys that I thought were really hot, all of a sudden I thought, well, gee, I don't like that guy so much. And somebody else I never noticed before, all of a sudden I realized that person has really great qualities. My perception of people and who they were and how I related to them changed in a way that I think has persisted till now. I mean, hot guys are still hot guys, but there's that difference. And during that time, I think I went into a profound period of introspection. And some people might say it was depression, but I don't think it was depression. It was introspection. It was almost like a prolonged meditation. Looking at my life, remembering some of the conversations that I had with my mother about in every phase of your life, what you do is going to be different, and your goals and what's going to give your life meaning is going to be different. And I contemplated those things. And then I went to Pacifica, which was a depth-oriented school of psychology. And all sorts of doors opened for me in terms of self-awareness about how to be in the world, how to relate to other people. And I developed some of the best friendships of my life during that time. So I think I've had a lot of stressors and traumas in my life, but I feel like they've all worked to make me a stronger person. And I'm very grateful for that. I would like to... since I don't have my crib sheet here, I can't really... There's one quote by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that I would like to quote because I thought it was so beautiful. And it is, don't protect the mountains from the windstorms, because then you will never see the beauty of the carvings. And I think that's part of what my story has been. I'm looking at the beauty of the carvings. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Anything that I mentioned that didn't go into?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about how your Buddhist practice, how that got flown into your story? When did that happen? How did it happen?
Well, I think I realized that there was a great synchronicity between my story and my mother's mentoring of me and how I found my way in the world that pretty much followed Buddhist belief systems. And writing my thesis, I became more aware of Buddhist writings, and it just seemed like a fit. And so I've come to Buddhism in the last few years, but I find that the meditation, in my own way, I was doing meditation, and very deep meditation. And I'm not a particularly good meditator, I'm not terribly good about just sitting down and meditating, but in a quiet moment, I'll just sit and I realize that what I'm doing is meditation. It's just not in quite the formal sense. And I find my thought about meditation is that meditation, as we do it here, is often turning off the cognitive side of the brain, the chatter and the talk, that is the right brain, and the left brain, and giving space to the unconscious. I think what we're actually giving space to when we're meditating is the unconscious part of our brain, and giving that room to breathe and to manifest in our lives.
In your view, is resilience sort of a quality that just happens to you, or is it something that you can actually cultivate?
You can cultivate it. And but I think you have to ask yourself questions. The questions that Paul young Eisendruth talked about. Who am I? What am I? What's my purpose here? And you have to ask those questions in times of difficulty. And when you do that, and I think if you follow the precepts of the Eight Noble Truths too, the Eightfold Path, I think that takes you there. I think it just happens almost organically. But you have to face your pain, you have to face your issues, and you have to look for purpose and meaning in them. How am I going to come out of this on the other side?
I'd like to hear more about your introspective phase. What was that like? What were the benefits? Was it like a retreat? How did you emerge from it? I sort of am going through an introspective phase where I'm looking at my own life and also just the way I move in the world and the world around me in a different way. And sometimes it feels like I'm becoming less social, more retreating. Was that your experience?
Very much so. During that phase, I sort of retreated from the world around me and I would often find myself just sort of sitting in a chair contemplating things and I'd start off with the contemplation about something, and the next thing I would know, an hour or two had gone by, but I'd feel very calm. I would feel like I was doing okay. And I didn't feel the need to fill my life with a lot of chatter, with a lot of empty things that were really important came forward. I knew what they were, and things that were not important sort of fell by the wayside during that time.
Did you derive strength from that space to face your fears? From that introspection? Did you somehow dig deeper and find some of that resilience down in there?
I think so, but at that point I was a pretty seasoned warrior, and I think I could face my fears pretty well. But yeah, it just gave me more fortitude and more acceptance of who I was and gratitude for what I had.
Final question about it: what prompted you to emerge from that phase, or are you still in it? And what was it like if you did emerge from it?
Well, life intruded. You can't stay in that phase for long periods of time. It's something that you can go in and out of, and you can try to cultivate that at times, but also other things happened, and I had to divert my attention to other things. I diverted my attention to go to school, which I think going to Pacifica was like 3 years of intense therapy, sort of a Woody Allen deluxe. but it was also additive. It all sort of came together organically for me.
What was it like being an emergency room doctor? I think that's a rather...
Well, as I say, it was the perfect fit for me in terms of my learning style, and my attention, my ability to focus on many things at one time, but having a hard time for a long time on one. So in that way, it was very good. I think for a long time I was sort of an adrenaline junkie, and that you got plenty of adrenaline rushes in the emergency room. But the other part about it was that you were also dealing with life and death issues and horrible tragedies and pain. And that was something that I found myself closing off. And actually when I was diagnosed, when I knew that I had to retire, which incidentally was April 1st, I had a huge sense of release and relief, because I realized that I had been setting up, I set my life up into compartments that were pretty rigid, and one of them was dealing with trauma, dealing with pain, not carrying that home with me. And I finally felt that this is a time where I can really integrate my life. I can let those barriers down. I can be more of an integrated human being. So, and I'll tell you, in the emergency department, you could deal with the most devastating thing, and then you had to go on to the next thing. And that in itself was what I learned, the way I learned to cope is that when something really horrible had happened, or when some tragedy had happened, or when I just told a family that one or two people had died in an accident, whatever it was, I would take a minute or two out just to go in the bathroom, and I'd look at myself in the mirror and say, this is real, this is true, and it really hurts. And I would splash water in my face, and I'd maybe give myself a chance to just have a tear or two, and then I'd just buckle up and go outside. But even that moment or two of recognizing my pain somehow made me stronger to go back to doing what I had to do.
How did you almost get murdered in Africa?
Well, after the Vietnam experience, I was still in the Air Force for a year, and a dentist and I hopped an Air Force flight to Africa. And once we got to Kinshasa, Zaire, we got on a commercial flight to go to Kampala, Uganda. Uganda at that time had the most beautiful gay parks in Africa. And it was I had no idea what was happening. It was sort of a riot at the airport, but we got onto our plane, and once we got on the plane, we realized that the whole plane was trashed. All the oxygen masks were just, the strings were hanging down, the masks were missing, the paneling was half missing, and we were wondering, what in the hell are we actually going to land in one piece? And then we did land. We landed in Burundi, where there happened to be a revolution going on, and the entire plane load of people was marched off and put against a brick wall like that, with soldiers and machine guns who just aimed them at us and sort of played with us for 4 hours. We were wondering if we were going to be executed. And we weren't, but 10,000 people died that weekend in Burundi. From there, we got to, the timing was terrible. We got to... We got to Uganda, and a few days after we got there, Idi Amin told all the people of Asian extraction that they had to leave carrying their belongings. And in the few days leading up to that, we had been surrounded by a gang of people who didn't like us because we were white. They were throwing rocks at us and saying they were going to kill us. And somebody I had met there who was a really nice guy who we went to Murchison Falls with. He was backpacking, and we went to, the night we got there, we went to the restaurant and for show and so forth, and then I offered to take him back to the backpacking area, and he said, no, I'm going to walk. And I said, well, there's signs saying everybody don't walk around here at night. And he said, I'm not worried. I've spent 1.5 years walking up and down Africa. And the next morning we were all supposed to go on a ferry going up the Victoria Nile to Murchison Falls, and he didn't show up, and he didn't show up. And then when he did show up, he was completely covered in blood. And we were shocked. We said, what happened? Well, he had been thrown into the jail, into this little cell that was, he could only lie down diagonally because he was tall. And during the middle of the night, they threw in a poacher who they proceeded to beat to death with metal pipes. And then in the morning, they let him loose. And so after that, we decided to go back to the capital, to Kampala, just when all of this exodus of people was happening. And we ended up living in that armada of buses, actually sitting on top of the bus, leaving Kampala, going to Kenya.
Wow.
As I say, the timing was terrible.
Well, any other questions? Jerry, thank you so much for sharing with us. Very enlightening. Do we have any announcements?
Well, I guess I do announce it because we got a knock on the door during our silence, and there is this group is called the Buddhist Global Relief, and they're having some kind of walk to help. I'm not sure what their mission is, except it's called Buddhist Global Relief, but there's going to be some kind of walk, and they invited us to become involved. That's all I know.
When is the walk?
I can't. I don't have my glasses, so I can't do this. Somewhere. So anyway, I'll leave it out there, and then if someone who is kind of more in control, disseminate the information.
Thank you. Cass.
Hi, I'm Cass. I'm your host today. Please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the sun. There's hot water and refreshments. So if you do use the hot water for tea, please wash your cup with hot soapy water. I'll be coming around with the Donna Bowl recommended donations to help meet the expenses of the zombies, $5 to $8, or whatever you choose to donate. There's a sign-up sheet on the credenza for people who want to join the mailing list. And some people gather at the front door around 12:30 to go for lunch. It's open to anybody who wants to join in. So just gather at the front door around 12:30.
Mark, I'm glad to be back. I've been single-mindedly working on a film, and I wanted to let people know. Some people actually have connections to this. It's a clinic, the first transgender clinic in the country, which we started in the Tenderloin. Two of our social workers, Tony Patchell and Larry Yang, went on to become priests. And we're finally editing, and we have a website up, and if anybody wants to know more about it, I have cards with the website address. I'd love to share it with you.
Mark, are you on our Yahoo list?
No.
Okay.
I was on the sign-up list, but I never got it.
Okay. So talk to me, and maybe that way you can put out a message to the whole group as well. Roy?
Thanks again, Jerry, for sharing your story with us today. Our speaker next week will be Jim Stewart, who will be doing a talk about Buddha and Jesus for Easter Sunday.
Anything else? Well, I just want to say warm welcome to our guests, new members, returning members. Is it Wolf?
Yeah, my name. I gotta actually make a little announcement. I used to live in San Francisco. Went back to New York to get a master's degree, and I celebrated my 70th birthday yesterday. And I wanted to do that in San Francisco, and I thought it was a perfect place to be here today. So I'm very happy to be back from home.
Welcome, and Scott, and Gerhard, and Brad. And a warm welcome back to San Francisco, Bob McMullen. So let's gather in a circle for our dedication here. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.